Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is I believe, our 9th lecture for the fall series, so we're really moving along here. Thanks for coming out. It's been a very wet and cold day out there, but happy Halloween. I have a couple of announcements. First, make sure you turn off your cell phones or mute them if you haven't already. And the second is there's no lecture next week. We've been every Friday since the beginning of September, but there's a bazaar they're having in the hall, so we can't have a lecture here next Friday. So if you come, well, nobody's going to be here. Today we are happy to have Tinotenda Charles Rutanhira. Was born in Harare, Zimbabwe, and studied in South Africa before immigrating to the U.S. He co-founded the Vermont Professionals of Color Network in 2019 and previously worked at Dealer.com and Cox Automotive. Tino has produced and hosted a podcast, co-founded Best in Vermont Tours and Charters, acted in a Flynn theater production, and performed stand-up comedy at the Vermont Comedy Club. He currently serves on the boards of the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Janet S. Munt Family Room, and Let's Build Homes. Beyond work, Tino is passionate about music, podcasts, and competitive sports, particularly soccer. He is an avid Liverpool FC fan, often found yelling at the TV on match days. He is a proud single parent to an amazing 20-year-old daughter, whom he considers his greatest source of pride and joy. Please welcome Tino, Charles Rutanhira.
We are where we are now. So my name, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to present to you. I've heard about this lecture series, and when my friend Kathy Chamberlain asked me to come and speak, I was like, I don't know what to talk about. And then after a couple of weeks of ideation, I came up with this idea of talking about who is Vermont for, and then also talking about mixing that with talking about the organization that I co-founded. So my name, my name is Tinotenda Charles Rutanhira. I am co-founder of the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. Some people know me as Charles. Others know me as Tinotenda. That is because in my native country of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia at the time, one of the policies of the system of apartheid that existed in Southern Africa at the time required us to have English names to go to school. So my school transcripts have Charles as my first name, while my birth certificates and all my legal documents have Tinotenda as my first name. So when I came to the United States, I used Charles as a way to code switch so that I wouldn't stand out, but also as a way to whitewash my resume, as then the word Tinotenda would not sound very English. So, and also I had to explain to employers why I was using two different names. And so just using Charles was easier. Even though I came here, for 3 years, I was living in Vermont, working minimum wage jobs. I was working in hotels, in restaurants, in manufacturing, in retail, because nobody really gave me a chance. Not to say that those jobs were beneath me, but I had already had a university degree by the time I came to the United States. While I am not here to address the dark history of apartheid in Southern Africa, I am telling you this only to point out that the yoke of apartheid has been a yoke around my neck for the last 50 years. Even though apartheid in Zimbabwe ended in 1980, and I've lived here in the United States for the past 25 years, I still use and carry around two different names as a result of this racist legacy. The same racist legacy impacts my BIPOC brothers and sisters here in America. BIPOC, B-I-P-O-C, which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, or persons of color, or people of the global majority. or just simply non-white people. 400 years of systemic oppression continues to negatively affect BIPOC folk in America today in both subtle and obvious ways. Centuries of discrimination and exploitation have left BIPOC Americans, the Black Americans in particular, much poorer than white Americans. And so that's why I do some of the work I do. When I talk about the legacy of racism, I'm talking not really about individuals, because generally most people, like yourselves, are not racist, but it is the systems that are created that you benefit from that perpetuate racism. And those systems shape who feels like they belong and who feels like they don't. Every community wrestles with the question in its own way, including right here in Vermont. Who gets to call the state home? Who feels fully seen and accepted? I'm going to show you a video which offers a perspective. It's about 4 minutes long, and I share it not to criticize or to ridicule, but to invite reflection. It is an outsider's look at Vermont. Now granted, this video is from Saturday Night Live, but it is a narrative that is shared by so many that live outside of Vermont. And as we know, perception sometimes is reality. So as you watch, I encourage you to look and think about, how does it feel? Do you feel uncomfortable? And what might it reveal about who Vermont is really for? The video might have stirred some feelings of pride, maybe perhaps discomfort, maybe even defensiveness, and that's okay. What matters is that it shows us something real. Vermont has a reputation for being peaceful, picturesque, but that image often comes with an invisible asterisk, one that assumes everyone who lives here must look, think, and live a certain way. The truth is, Vermont is at a crossroads. Beneath the postcard beauty, we're facing 4 existential crises that will determine whether the state's future is vibrant and inclusive or shrinking and exclusive. The crises that we're facing are population. We're getting older and smaller every year, and our workforce isn't keeping up with our needs. Housing. Prices are skyrocketing. Supply is stagnant, and entire communities are being priced out, especially families of color. Healthcare. You can't meet the healthcare needs of our population. Vermont already has the highest healthcare costs in the nation. And childcare, represented by high costs for families, low wages and shortages for educators, and limited availabilities for our toddlers. I'm going to focus on the first 2 because they hold the keys to all of the other issues, and perhaps more importantly, they are questions they answer questions about who belongs here and who Vermont is truly for. I've lost control of my technology here. There we go. When we talk about Vermont's population crisis, we often hear it framed as a numbers problem. Too few workers, too few young people, too few babies being born. Right now, Vermont does face demographic challenges as the 2nd oldest state in the country and the 2nd least populated. Since 2015, Vermont is experiencing more deaths than births, and as such, Vermont is aging faster than all the states in the United States, and our age gap has doubled since 2000. related to demographics is workforce challenges. We currently are sitting at a 2.6% unemployment rate, which means that even if every single unemployed Vermonter who is unemployed today applied and got the jobs, out of the 20,000 unfilled jobs in Vermont at the moment, we would still have over 17,000 jobs that still remain unfilled. According to the Department of Labor, they are projecting over 15,000 retirements over the next decade per year. 15,000 against 5,000 high school graduates over the next decade. As maybe your grandkids might say, the math ain't mathing. And then diversity challenges. The state is the third whitest state in the country. We all know that through big consulting firms like McKinsey & Co., Accenture, Deloitte, they all have come out with reports that talk about how diversity, not just in an individual's life, but on teams, in organizations, within communities, or even entire states, brings about with it greater productivity, greater creativity, greater decision-making, greater profitability, etc. But the demographic challenge is more than just that. It's also an identity problem, because at the very same time that Vermont is struggling to keep its towns and villages alive, we're still wrestling with who gets to be part of the solution. But here's the paradox. While Vermont's overall population is flat, our BIPOC community has grown by 112% between the 2010 census and the 2020 census. That growth is real. These are families, workers, entrepreneurs, neighbors, people who want to contribute and build a future here in Vermont. But when you rarely see yourself being reflected or welcomed or included, you start to ask yourself questions like, am I part of the story? Does this community see us as a part of its future? That is why I do the work that I do. It isn't just about equity, it's about humanity. It's about creating a Vermont where no one has to question why they belong here or why their contribution does not matter. At the beginning, and this then brings us to the second crisis, one that touches everything, and that's housing. Because if you can't live here, you can't work here. And if you cannot work here, you can't build a life here. And if you cannot build a life here, you don't belong here. So when I'm talking about housing, it's not just about real estate. I'm talking about the very foundation of belonging, the right to call Vermont home. So literally 12 years ago, to the day almost, back in 2013, I went on Facebook and on Front Porch Forum trying to find a fun, family-friendly neighborhood to take my then 7-year-old daughter trick-or-treating. The apartment we rented didn't have kids, and the Old North End wasn't exactly known for its Halloween scene. Eventually, my research landed me in a neighborhood called the Village at Dorset Park. I still remember doing a slow drive through the neighborhood a few days before Halloween, just to make sure it was safe. Because even in Vermont, we black folk know that there are some neighborhoods that you just don't invite yourself to. The last thing I wanted was to be in the wrong place with police lights flashing and my little girl in tears standing there holding an empty candy bag. Driving through the neighborhood, I remember thinking, wow, you probably have to be a millionaire to live here. who are these people that live in this neighborhood? CEOs, maybe business owners? Could there be celebrities in here? I had actually never seen a neighborhood like that in my 13 years of Vermont, because I literally had no reason to be on that side of town. Needless to say, Halloween was magical. My daughter called it the bestest ever. We still talk about it to this day, and she's 20. She filled her bag of candy to the brim, and it wasn't even the cheap stuff either. We promised and made a vow that we will be back next year, this time with 10 bags. What I didn't know was that I would actually come back, but for a completely different reason. The following summer, I was house hunting with my realtor, and she turned onto Swift Street and by Veterans Memorial Park over there, and I realized I was driving into the very same neighborhood. Long story short, I bought a home right in that neighborhood. And in a way, I was extremely lucky, because the house I own today came about because the couple that lived there unfortunately passed away, and their children all lived out of state and had no intentions of retaining the home. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and put in the right bid that was accepted. I love Dorset Park. I really do. It's quiet, it's friendly, it's safe, conveniently located. It's everything that one would want in a dream home. It was my first home. But out of the nearly 180 homes in Dorset Park, I can only count 10 families of color. And I am only one of 3 black residents. So here's the truth. People like me shouldn't be the exception in neighborhoods like this, because when diversity is treated as a remarkable, it means that exclusion has become normal. I'm not asking anyone to move out of this neighborhood, but what I'm asking is that Vermont makes room, because belonging shouldn't be a privilege that you buy. It should be a right that we build into our communities. So let's talk a little bit about housing in data, using data. Did you know that 62% of all homes in Burlington are renter-occupied? And that 50% of non-white households in Vermont are more likely to have what HUD labels housing problems, which means that their homes lack complete kitchen facilities or correct plumbing, and that the household is cost burdened, which means that they are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent or mortgage payments and utilities. When it comes to ownership, 73% of white households in Vermont own their own homes, while just 20% of black households in Burlington and 26% of black households statewide are homeowners. This disparity is significantly larger than what we see nationally, where 70% of white households and 41% of black households are homeowners. So, knowing that the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Burlington costs $2,100 a month, and given the fact that 80% of black Burlingtonians rent, if you are making $75,000 a year, a full third of your gross, not net, of your gross income is going towards rent. It's a travesty. The data around housing is staggering. And I will point you in the direction of Let's Build Homes or the Vermont Futures Project for more information on that, because I'm not here just to talk about housing. But the scale of this disaster should demand an all-hands-on-deck approach. The American dream of home ownership in Vermont is heavily skewed and intrinsically favors white families. But we know that it's already also impacting white families. If we don't resolve the housing crisis, where are your children and your grandchildren going to live? Certainly not in Vermont. So is driving to Boston, or a 6-hour drive to New Jersey, or a flight to St. Louis or Dallas or Tampa twice a year really what you want to do in order to see your grandchildren? Housing is more than about shelter. It is what roots people into a community and gives them a stake in the future. 73%, so 73% of white households own their own homes, compared to 26% of black households. In Vermont, the land of Bernie Sanders, the so-called bastion of liberal progressive policies. This gap is not an accident. It's a reflection of the systems that we have built and the priorities that we have ignored. If you want Vermont to be a home for everyone, we have to build a Vermont that truly makes room for everyone. So, who is everyone? While Vermont struggles with housing and population loss, something remarkable is happening quietly in the background. The BIPOC community, BIPOC standing for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, is growing and fast. When I moved to Vermont in the early 2000s, Vermont was the whitest state in the nation, and the number of Black, Indigenous, and People of Color living in Vermont made up 3% of the population. In 20 years, we now make up 10% of the population. These are our new neighbors, our colleagues, our small business owners, our educators, our legislators, and future leaders. They're the ones helping to keep the Vermont story alive and, more importantly, evolving. And that growth didn't happen by accident. It happened because people saw possibility here in Vermont and chose to come here or to stay here. But possibility alone isn't enough. It has to be nurtured, and it has to be supported. That's exactly why I helped start the Vermont Professionals of Color Network, to make sure that the growth is not just lasting, but it's prosperous. So who is this Vermont Professionals of Color Network? Well, it's an organization that I co-founded in 2019 with my co-founder, Weiwei Wong. The organization has a membership of over 1,500 and continues to grow exponentially. When I came to Vermont, like I said in my introduction, I already had a university degree. But even then, it took me 3 years of living here, working minimum wage jobs in hotels and restaurants and manufacturing before anyone gave me a chance. I was actually working at a deli called Anything's Possible, that's downtown, where the whiskey room is, when making sandwiches, when this gentleman who works in the bank, Chittenden Bank at the time, identified my talents and said, I want you to work for us. When eventually I quizzed him about why he was wanting me to work for him, he said to me, I see something in you. The way you conduct yourself, the way you serve people, the quality of your sandwiches. I didn't know that a sandwich would have that much power, but hey, we are where we are, right? And within a week, I had given him my resume, I had been recruited for an interview, and then within about a week of that, I had been offered a job as a teller. Mind you, I had previously applied to Chittenden Bank and not gotten any response, despite having a degree. And so when I went in and started working as a teller, it took about 2 months before the IT help desk manager found out that I had an IT degree. And so she poached me from being a teller to working at the help desk. Within about 3 months of that, I had been promoted because I was in my element. This was the thing that I was good at. I knew how to work with computers because I'd gone to school for that. Within about 6 months of that, I was promoted again, and again, until I became a system engineer overseeing entire systems for Chittenden Bank's wealth management teams, for their payroll services team, for the insurance group, as well as the HR group. And if you don't believe me, Kathy Chamberlain is in here somewhere. She knows that story because she was there. And, you know, after that, I then got recruited by My Web Grocer, which was started by the Terrence, and then later on moved jobs to work at dealer.com, and then later on got promoted up and working with Cox Automotive, which is the parent company of dealer.com. The whole time I kept thinking to myself, like, somebody recognized and opened a door for me. They recognized what I was capable of. And I then went on and did all these things and got all these promotions and even actually started my own businesses. And I couldn't help but think to myself, like, you know what? Perhaps I was like Michael Jordan, who was seated on the bleachers while the Bulls were playing. But I wasn't seated in the bleachers because I was part of the team. I was in my street clothes. And in fact, for some, there might be some that aren't even in the arena. And yet, when given the opportunity to wear the Bulls uniform, you could become the MVP. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Michael Jordan, but I hope you see the point that I'm trying to make, is that there's folks out there that are just looking for somebody to give them a shot so that they can be part of the game. And so that is the thing that I carried with me for years, trying to figure out, how do I open doors for other people? How do I identify other folks like me who could then go above and beyond what anybody had expected of them? So that is how I created the organization, Vermont Professionals of Color Network. I met my co-founder, Weiwei, who was trying to do something similar around mentorship of youth of color. And eventually, her and I got together in 2018, started ideating on what this could look like. And by 2019, we had actually created this organization and held our first networking event at the Vermont Comedy Club, where over 80 people attended that event. There's Weiwei, and there's me and the rest of the team. We are now a 501c3 since 2021, and we now have a staff of 5 people, including an intern, as well as a part-time marketing specialist. This team is what's doing and making all the change happen in Vermont for the BIPOC community. But what exactly is the mission of the organization? The mission and the aim of VTPOC is to improve the experience, the representation, and the success of BIPOC professionals and entrepreneurs in the state of Vermont. How do we do that? We do that through a number of ways. So when you think about our organization, we are founded on a foundation of inclusion and belonging, trying to figure out how do we ensure that folks of color feel like they belong, feel like they've got community here. Because we cannot start thinking about and talking about career advancement and upward mobility and opportunities to climb the economic ladder when people feel unwelcome, or they don't feel like this is home, or they don't feel invested in the community in which they live. So our inclusion and belonging layer is really about how do we create opportunities like networking events, meetups, community events, etc., to ensure that folks have that sense of belonging. The Surgeon General of the United States in 2018 wrote about the epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And he referenced 2 critical areas, 1, minorities, and 2, rural areas. That's a double whammy for a person of color living in Vermont. So for us, this layer of inclusion and belonging is critically important, because when a person then feels like, I am loved here, I'm wanted here, I feel safe here, I feel like I am invested in this place, then we can start talking about the other pillars that we support. The pillar of promoting BIPOC professional development, for example, where we help folks with upward mobility, with career services and resources. We also give employers opportunities to find and attract BIPOC talent that's available here in Vermont. And even as we start to look beyond the borders of the state, we offer services for employers to help recruit and then also retain folks of color who might choose to call Vermont home. On our website, we have a job board for employers to advertise jobs. We have a civic engagement page where we allow nonprofits to invite people to become board of directors into their companies and their organizations. That is how, as an organization, we are promoting BIPOC professional development, trying to ensure that folks feel like they've got a way to climb up that economic ladder. The next pillar that we support is BIPOC entrepreneurship. The BIPOC community are serial entrepreneurs. We love a side hustle, and there's so many entrepreneurs out there that we want to support, not just with their ideas about entrepreneurship, but also about how do we help them grow their businesses? How do we help them expand? How do we help them to become the next Dealer.coms or the next seventh generations, the next Ben and Jerry's? And even if they don't want to become that big, how do we just help them to amass the wealth that everybody else talks about, that generational wealth, so that their kids and their children's children also can benefit from this American dream? So we've got a business directory on our website that boasts over 400 BIPOC-owned businesses. So as you go through your lives, whether you are like looking for a yoga instructor, or you're looking for an appliance repair person, or you're looking for a restaurant to go support, think about going to our business directory so that you can identify a BIPOC business. Staples doesn't need your business. They've got enough money. Domino's doesn't need your business. They've got enough money. Look for a BIPOC business that is a small business that can benefit from your support and try to help them. We also offer technical support services where we help individuals find ways in which they can navigate the complicated business environment. When you think about Vermont, there's over 6,000 nonprofits in Vermont. How does somebody navigate that when they're trying to still run a business? So what we do is we offer resource navigation so that these folks can easily find and be connected with the right person at the right organization. Think about all the contacts that we have, whether it's CVOEO or Center for Women in Enterprise or the SBA or VDSBDC. Thank you. Or VDSBDC. Those are the sort of organizations that we connect into and try to help our community. And then the third pillar is empowering young adults. When you think about young people that are about to hit the workforce, graduating from college, typically when you think about a young black or brown kid versus a white kid, their resumes, their GPAs are pretty much the same. However, when you look at their resumes and you think about the experiential opportunities that white kids have, that's what makes their resume stand up, because they've got uncles that work in the corporate space. They've got next door neighbors that can give them a referral. They've got brothers and sisters that are in those spaces. And so what we're trying to do is create mentorship opportunities for the young black and brown adults that are about to enter the workforce. How do we help them to be able to get into the workforce, into corporate spaces, into predominantly white spaces, and hit the ground running? So we're doing all of that for young people as they're about to enter the workforce. And everything that we do, we are not a political organization, but everything that we do is surrounded by representation and advocacy. We want to be at the seat of the table as corporate corporate executives, legislators, decision makers, select board meetings, whoever is making decisions, not just about black and brown issues, but about Vermont issues. We believe that prosperity starts with opportunities to climb the economic ladder, and that a prosperous BIPOC community is a good thing for all of Vermont, black, brown, and white. So my time is kind of getting limited, so I'm going to fly through these. This is how you can support. I know that many white people have conversations with me about how uncomfortable it is sometimes to try to support organizations for folks of color because they don't know what to do. They maybe are afraid of saying the wrong things. But here's the truth. Vermont cannot become the state it aspires to be without folks like you supporting. Because equity isn't just a BIPOC issue. It's a Vermont issue. The prosperity of communities of color doesn't come and won't come at the expense of white Vermonters. In fact, it strengthens the entire state because our community, our culture, our workforce, and our future depends on it. So I encourage you to encourage your BIPOC friends to join VTPOC. If they're not aware of it, let them know that you've met one of the founders. We sound like a really cool organization, I hope, based on the looks I'm getting, that also support the business directory. We've talked about that. If you are an employer or you've got people that you know who are employers, tell them about our job board. You know, you can spend money posting jobs on LinkedIn, on Indeed, but we've got a captive BIPOC audience that is looking for jobs, folks that are here in Vermont. So why post on LinkedIn when you can post on the VTPOC website? We also have that civic engagement page. If you serve on a board and you're looking to diversify your board, think about advertising there. It's free for nonprofits. And then promoting BIPOC-centric events. Like I talked about, we really want to ensure that folks feel connected and part of the community. So if there are events that are going on, our website has an events page. Post those events on our website. And then donate your time and resources to the organization. The last thing I'll say, or at least second to last thing I'll say, is that we also need financial resources. VTPOC advances racial equity and economic opportunity in Vermont by supporting BIPOC professionals and entrepreneurs through community building, programs, and advocacy. All of that doesn't happen for free. So we are looking for folks to help us raise money, to donate money, so that we can then equip the folks, the community of color that is the fastest growing demographic group in the state, to prepare them to be the next leaders of the state. So it would be remiss of me not to mention that DEI is under attack. Federal funding is disappearing, state support is drying up, and corporations are pulling back due to recession. So again, I say if the BIPOC community is the only and fastest growing demographic group in Vermont, if I was a broker on Wall Street and I told you that all the other stocks are declining, and yet there's one stock that is increasing, where would you put your investment, right? Because our future firefighters, our future educators, our future business owners, our future leaders are coming from this specific group. In conclusion, when I first asked you, who is Vermont for, I didn't mean it as an accusation. I meant it as an invitation to imagine a Vermont big enough, bold enough, and brave enough to belong to all of us. Because if Vermont is truly for everyone, then it must look like everyone, and it must welcome everyone, and must be built for everyone. I invite you to engage with us and to join us in the revolution that is playing out right here in this brave little state. Thank you.
Thank you, Tinotenda. Let's open it up for questions. Does anyone have a question? They can raise their hand and I'll bring the microphone over. No questions on that side. How about on Zoom? Anybody?
There's a question right here.
So regarding the housing crisis, I think the legislature has recognized that sometimes zoning is too restrictive and has led to, a real shortage in housing. Do you have anything, you'd add to that in terms of some of the reasons for the housing shortage?
Yeah, so with housing, it's not just a legislative problem. It is a problem that all of us as Vermonters need to tackle. When I think about some of the conversations I've had with folks, a lot of them tell me about the fact that, well, we want to keep Vermont, we don't want Vermont to become New Jersey. And I always tell people, like, for us to become New Jersey has 11 million people. We're not going to become New Jersey. So that's the first thing, is that we do need to grow. There is no way that we can keep Vermont the way it is and expect that we will survive, because we're losing employers. Organizations are leaving Vermont. We're losing employees because they're leaving Vermont. And it shouldn't just be a legislative problem. It should be a problem that all of us address, whether it's at select board meetings, at planning commission meetings, etc. We need to actually talk to folks about the importance of housing. And I know that the environment is critically important to people, but I forget the stat, but I think it's like 87% of Vermont is protected land anyway. Most of the space that people are talking about building are in urban development zones like Burlington, like South Burlington, like Winooski. And yes, it does mean we do need to cut down a few trees. But if we don't, I think the alternative is that what do we want to do? Are we going to lose, like I said, your kids, your grandkids are all going to leave. It's not just a problem for folks like me. It's a problem for the people that don't have housing, and some of them are pretty well off, your kids, your grandkids, etc. So I think that's kind of part of the answer. Thank you.
I serve on the board of Resource, formerly Recycle North, and we are looking for people of color to serve on our board. Would your organization help in that way?
Absolutely. So 2 ways we can help. One is I'll just ask you to post on our civic engagement page. So if you go to our website, there's a drop-down called Your Work. There's only like 3 tabs anyway, so if you don't find it, you'll see it eventually. And then within that drop-down is an option for civic engagement. If you go to that page, there is a button that says post board positions here. If you click on it, it takes like 5 minutes to fill out what it is that you're looking for, or what that board position will be able to accomplish. And then once it's up, people will go there and look for it. But it shouldn't be, I love that you're asking me how do you get that, because I feel like sometimes to be on a board, you have to either work, like play golf at a country club or belong to the country club to get board level positions. We want to tear that down and give people who are tenured employees who maybe have skills or desires to do stuff in a particular space, the opportunity to serve and to learn how decisions are made, how organizations are built, how leaders lead. I think if you give folks opportunities to join boards, those are the sort of opportunities that folks will get. So I appreciate you asking that.
When you speak with the other members of your organization or the other people in your circles that you're talking about, do you get the impression that when they look for jobs or housing that they actually confront actual racial discrimination, or is it more a matter of just not knowing how to connect either on their end or on the end of the employers or the sellers and so forth?
Yeah, so I think one of two things. It's an access issue because there's just not a lot of housing available in Vermont to begin with. Folks that want to buy homes, it's almost like whoever's got the most money and whoever knows somebody who knows somebody before that property is listed, it's gone before a lot of folks who look like me have even the opportunity to get access to that. And so that's how you end up with 20% of the 80% of black people in particular renting and not being able to own a home. And yet, when you look at the price that they're paying for the rent, it's more than what any of us are paying for our mortgages. And so I want to make sure that, like, the other issue too is the fact that, like, a lot of us, just because of historical circumstances, do not have generational wealth. So we don't have, like, the $60,000, $50,000 to put down as a deposit. So it's hard to compete with somebody who maybe perhaps inherited $100,000 because their uncle passed away and they got like a windfall. So it's hard for people to be able to compete. So which is why we are advocating for housing abundance, because then it does level the playing field. And so I really would like to reiterate the fact that a lot of folks aren't racist, but it's the systems that have been created, and that's why people talk about systemic racism. It's the fact that the loan origination process is difficult to navigate if you maybe have a black mark on your credit score, or maybe the fact that you don't have the capital to put down the deposit and so on. So that's kind of part of what is the challenge with trying to get a lot of folks of color into communities like the one that I live in.
Thanks. Any other questions? No, looks like everybody's quiet today.
It's the weather.
Maybe you answered it, I didn't hear, but what brought you to Vermont?
Oh, I came to Vermont because of the political situation in Zimbabwe at the time, and so I applied through the refugee resettlement program and ended up in Vermont. And I always tell people I didn't choose Vermont, Vermont chose me. But now that we're together, we're like a married couple. Yes, sir.
You complained that, and I agree. Sorry. Thank you for your input. You complained, and I agree, that the amount of money it takes to get into a purchasing situation with a house is like, you have to have down payment of $60,000 or more. What would you suggest would be a source for people of color, people just getting started of any color, to try to come up with that kind of money for a down payment if they don't have it in their bank account and they're employed and they have a good income and they're paying rent prices right now that would probably be that or more? So this ubiquitous down payment, where would you suggest that it could come from?
Well, a lot of it, I think, ought to come from the government, I think. Because when you think about how probably a lot of you got your first home, it was through what? The GI Bill and like the VA, right? Where
there's VA and FHA.
VA and FHA.
And of course, if you're ex-military, you can get a GI loan at zero down. So why not create a situation like that? And who would you go to say if you're just starting out at your first home, you're employed, and you're paying rent, you get zero down, and it's backed by the government.
That is one of the things we would love to do, but unfortunately, like you're saying, the VA and the GI Bill, those were government-initiated things. They weren't like just random citizens like myself creating those. Those were actually powered by the United States government. So I think that is a way in which I would love to see folks to get that shot, because that then opens that door and allows people to have that first time. I know like Champlain Housing Trust and VHFA, they offer loans and they're doing a really fantastic job of giving people opportunities to get that first time loan, but it's limited resources and limited funds. Thank you.
Quick question. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everything that you shared. But certainly, I see the biggest problem is that the communities, the towns and cities aren't really willing to open land. Neighborhoods say, not in my neighborhood. We don't want that development here. And real estate people that I know that would love to sell more homes complain of this all the time, that we just need more inventory and we need more building. So I'm not sure where we go with that, but to me that's a big hurdle that we have to overcome.
Thank you, that's a great point. And I don't know if you guys are avid readers, but I would recommend you read the book The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. It talks about the zero-sum game where we've been taught as Americans a lie, that the size of the American pie is a limited size, and that in anything that we do, there's got to be winners and there's got to be losers. And that's kind of like the American ethos is like, you got to be the champ, right? And yet, what we are seeing and what we're proposing is that like the success and the prosperity of black and brown people doesn't have to come at the expense of white people. Just because we want to lift one group up, it doesn't mean that one group needs to come down. I think the size of the American pie is big enough for all of us. The land that's available in Vermont is enough for us to be able to build homes, and still have plenty of land that is wild and doesn't have to be torn down. And on top of that, I also want to argue with folks that don't want construction built in their neighborhoods, because the question is, how did you end up in that neighborhood? At some point, that neighborhood was wild. And yet, now that you have yours, you don't want anybody else to build. And yet, when that development was being built, that provided you the opportunity to get a house. So, thank you. I 100% agree. I wish people would think about that we're not looking to try to build miles and miles of concrete. And I think there's environmental concerns and considerations that we 100% need to be on board with. But also at the same time, Vermont cannot survive at the rate at which you're going. Things have to change. Because one thing's for sure, right? You either anticipate and do change, or otherwise change happens to you. And the outcomes of that, you don't know.
Can I add one more question?
I think that's all the time we have, unfortunately, Kathy. But thanks for your perspective, thanks for your lecture, and we'll have a happy Halloween.
Thank you very much.